Good evening. Tonight, we invite you to close your eyes and drift away to a time before time. A time when the world was young and the universe was nothing but potential. We're going to explore the vast, intricate, and ancient stories of Greek mythology, not as a lesson to be learned, but as a journey to be experienced. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let the modern world fade away. Let us return to the very beginning. Long before the mountains pierced the clouds, long before the oceans rolled against the shores, and long before the first sunrise painted the sky, there was only chaos. But do not think of this chaos as confusion or noise. In the ancient sense, chaos was simply a void. It was a yawning abyss, a silent, endless expanse of nothingness. It was not dark, nor was it light. It was simply the absence of form. It waited for eons, stretching out into infinity, a blank canvas waiting for the first stroke of existence. From this deep, slumbering void, the first entities emerged. They did not appear with a bang, but with a slow, inevitable rising. First came Gaia, the earth. She was solid, sure, and vast. She became the foundation of all things, the unshakable ground upon which history would be written. Beneath her, stretching infinitely downwards, was Tartarus, a deep, misty pit as far below the earth as the sky is above it. And then there was Eros, not the playful Cupid of later Valentines, but the primordial force of attraction, the gravity that would eventually bind matter and minds together. Then, from the void, darkness took shape. Nyx, the night, unfurled her shadowy wings, and Erebus, the deep darkness of the Shadowlands, joined her. From their silent union in the gloom, they produced their opposites: Aether, the bright, glowing upper air that the gods would one day breathe, and Hemera, the day, who would scatter the morning light across the cosmos. Chapter 2. The Sky and the Earth. Gaia, the earth, was alone in her vastness. Desiring a covering, a partner to match her magnitude, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. He was a dome of endless blue, studded with the first glittering stars. He stretched over her, covering her completely on all sides, promising a home for the blessed gods who were yet to be born. The union of earth and sky was the first marriage. It was elemental and raw. From this joining, life began to flourish, but it was a life of giants and monsters. First came the Titans, 12 of them, vast beings of immense power, embodying the fundamental pillars of the universe. There was Oceanus, the river that encircled the world; Hyperion, the lord of light; Mnemosyne, the lady of memory; and the youngest, the most clever, and the most ambitious of them all, Cronus. But Gaia also bore children that were not so beautiful to behold. There were the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steripes, and Arges, giants with a single burning eye in the center of their foreheads. They were the first smiths, destined to forge lightning. And then came the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones. These were mountains of muscle, with 50 heads and 100 arms each, possessing strength that could shatter continents. Uranus, the sky, looked upon these monstrous children with disgust. He hated what he had created. In his cruelty, he refused to let them see the light. As soon as they were born, he pushed them back into the hidden places of the earth, trapping them deep within Gaia. Gaia groaned under the weight of her imprisoned children. She was in pain, and her pain turned into a cold, hard resolve. She created a substance that had never existed before, gray flint. From it, she fashioned a great sickle, jagged and sharp. She called upon her Titan children, asking who would dare to stand against their father. Most remained silent, filled with fear of the vast sky. But Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward. "I will do it," he promised. The ambush was set. When Uranus descended to embrace the earth, bringing the night with him, Cronus struck. With the flint sickle, he severed his father's power and cast the remains into the sea. From the blood that fell upon the earth, the Furies were born, spirits of vengeance who would punish crimes for eternity. But from the sea foam where Uranus's power had fallen, something far more beautiful arose. The foam churned and bubbled, and from the white surf stepped Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and desire, fully grown and radiant. Uranus, wounded and retreating to the highest reaches of the universe, cursed his son. He warned Cronus that just as he had overthrown his father, Cronus too would be overthrown by his own children. With the sky pushed back, Cronus took the throne. He freed his Titan siblings, but he left the monsters, the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones, trapped in the dark. Cronus ruled over what poets would later call the Golden Age. It was a time when humanity, newly formed, lived without laws because they needed none. There was no war, no need for farming, for the earth gave food freely. It was a perpetual spring. But Cronus could not enjoy this peace. The curse of his father haunted his every waking moment. He took his sister Rhea as his queen, and she bore him children who would become the future Olympians: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon.
But Cronus, terrified of the prophecy, did the unthinkable. As each child was born, he took them from Rhea and swallowed them whole. He imprisoned them within his own divine stomach, ensuring no son or daughter could ever rise against him. Rhea grieved. She was a mother without children. When she was pregnant with her sixth child, she fled to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave on Mount Ida, she gave birth to Zeus. She left the infant to be raised by nymphs and guarded by warriors who clashed their shields to drown out the baby's cries. To Cronus, she presented a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. The Titan king, blinded by his paranoia, swallowed the stone without looking, believing he had secured his reign forever. In the quiet caves of Crete, Zeus grew. He drank the milk of a goat and ate honey from the bees. He grew strong not just in body, but in wisdom. He knew his destiny was not to hide in the shadows, but to bring light to the world. When he came of age, Zeus sought out Metis, the Titaness of wisdom. She gave him a potion, a mixture of herbs and nausea-inducing wine. Zeus, disguised, served this cup to his father, Cronus. The potion worked instantly. Cronus became violently ill and regurgitated the contents of his stomach. First came the stone, and then, miraculously, his children, fully grown and unharmed, for they were immortal gods. Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia stood beside their brother Zeus. The line was drawn. On one side stood the Titans, the old powers of raw nature, ruling from Mount Othrys. On the other stood the Olympians, the new gods of order and justice, fortifying Mount Olympus. The universe held its breath. The Titanomachy, the war of the Titans, was about to begin, a war that would shake the foundations of the cosmos for 10 long years. For 10 long years the universe trembled. The war between the Titans and the Olympians was not a battle of armies as we know them today. It was a collision of elemental forces. When the Titans marched, the earth shook. When the Olympians struck, the sky burned. Cronus and his siblings ruled from Mount Othrys, a fortress of jagged black rock. Zeus and his kin stood upon the snowy peaks of Mount Olympus. Day after day, year after year, they hurled boulders and lightning at one another. The seas boiled, and the forests caught fire. But the sides were too evenly matched. The Titans possessed raw, ancient strength, but the Olympians possessed agility and wit. Neither side could die, for they were all immortal, and so the war became a stalemate, a grinding cycle of noise and fury that seemed destined to last forever. Gaia, the ancient earth, watching the destruction of her surface, whispered a secret to Zeus. She told him that victory would not be won by strength alone, but by allies found in the darkest of places. Heeding the earth's counsel, Zeus descended into the gloom of Tartarus. There, behind gates of bronze and surrounded by triple walls of night, sat the forgotten children of Uranus, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones. They had been imprisoned for eons, bound in chains by their own father, and left there by their brother Cronus. Zeus stood before them not as a jailer, but as a liberator. He broke their chains. He offered them nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods, restoring their vitality. In gratitude, the Cyclopes, the master smiths of the cosmos, gave the Olympians gifts of unimaginable power. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, a weapon of pure, focused energy, capable of shattering mountains. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could shake the earth and command the waves. And to Hades, the silent brother, they gave the helm of darkness, a cap that rendered its wearer completely invisible, even to the eyes of gods. With these weapons, the tide turned. The 100-handed ones marched to the front lines. With their 100 arms, they ripped cliffs from the earth. They hurled 300 boulders at once, a barrage of stone that darkened the sky like a swarm of locusts. The Titans, blinded by Zeus's lightning and battered by the raining earth, finally faltered.
The chains that had once held the monsters were now placed upon the Titans. Cronus and his kin were cast down, thrown into the very pit of Tartarus when they had imprisoned others. Bronze gates were sealed behind them, and the 100-handed ones stood guard. The age of the Titans was over. The reign of Olympus had begun. Silence returned to the cosmos. The dust settled. Now the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood atop the highest peak to decide who would rule what. They did not fight. They had seen enough war. Instead, they chose to draw lots, leaving the decision to the hands of fate. They placed 3 tokens into a helmet and shook it. Zeus drew the lot for the sky. He became the king of gods, the lord of the heavens, the rain-bringer and the cloud-gatherer. His domain was the open air and the rolling thunder. Poseidon drew the lot for the sea. He descended into the depths, building a palace of coral and gems. The ocean, with its calm surfaces and violent storms, became his kingdom to command. Hades drew the lot for the underworld. He turned away from the sun and descended into the earth. He became the lord of the dead, the wealthy host who receives all mortals in the end. His realm was the shadow, the silence, and the rich veins of gold beneath the soil. The earth itself, Gaia, was claimed by no one. It remained common ground, a place where all gods could walk and where their dramas would unfold. With the gods seated on their thrones, the world was beautiful, but it was empty. There were no creatures to walk the forests or swim the rivers. Zeus tasked 2 Titan brothers who had sided with him during the war to populate the earth. They were Prometheus, whose name means forethought, and Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought. Epimetheus, acting quickly and without planning, began to shape the animals. He was generous with his gifts. He gave wings to the birds, sharp claws to the lions, fur to the bears, and swift legs to the deer. He worked tirelessly until the forests and oceans were teeming with life. But when he reached the final creation, man, he realized he had nothing left to give. No fur to keep them warm, no claws to defend themselves, no wings to fly. Mankind stood naked, weak and shivering on the cold earth. Prometheus looked upon this fragile creation with pity and love. He decided that if they could not have physical strength, they would have something greater. He shaped them from the mud of the earth, molding them in the image of the gods themselves, upright, with eyes that looked toward the stars.
Prometheus wanted his creation a chance to survive. He asked Zeus to allow men to use fire. But Zeus, fearing that humanity would become too powerful and arrogant, refused. "Let them live simply," Zeus decreed. "Fire belongs to the gods." Prometheus, defiant and clever, did not accept this. Under the cover of darkness, he climbed the slopes of Mount Olympus. He crept into the workshop of Hephaestus, the smith god, and stole a single glowing ember. He hid the spark inside a hollow fennel stalk and carried it down to the shivering mortals below. That night, the first campfires flickered across the plains. With fire, humanity began to learn. They cooked food, they forged tools, they warded off the beasts of the night. Civilization began to rise with the smoke of those fires. From high on Olympus, Zeus saw the lights twinkling in the dark. His rage was cold and absolute. He could not take back the fire, for a secret once learned cannot be unlearned. But he could punish the thief. Prometheus was seized. He was taken to the Caucasus Mountains, at the very edge of the world. There he was chained to a rock with unbreakable adamantine links. Every day a great eagle sent by Zeus would descend and eat out his liver. And every night, because he was immortal, the liver would grow back, only for the torture to begin again at dawn. Prometheus endured this agony for centuries, a silent martyr for the sake of mankind.
But Zeus was not finished. He wanted to punish humanity as well, to balance the gift of fire with a burden. He commissioned the creation of the first woman. Hephaestus molded her from clay, making her stunningly beautiful. Athena taught her weaving and crafts. Aphrodite gave her grace and longing. Hermes gave her a deceitful mind and a curious nature. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. Zeus presented Pandora to Epimetheus, the foolish brother of Prometheus. Despite warnings never to accept a gift from Zeus, Epimetheus was enchanted by her and took her into his home. Pandora brought with her a large earthen jar, often mistranslated as a box, given to her by the gods. She was told never to open it. But the gods had given her curiosity for a reason. Day after day she wondered what was inside. Finally she could resist no longer. She lifted the heavy lid. In an instant, a dark swarm rushed out. These were not bugs, but spirits. Old age, sickness, insanity, spite, passion, plague, and famine. All the evils that had been kept from humanity flew out into the world to plague mortals forever. Horrified, Pandora slammed the lid back down, but the jar was empty, save for one small, trembling spirit left at the very bottom. It was Eltis, hope. And so the Greeks explained the nature of our world, a place full of suffering and hardship, yet made bearable by the one thing the gods did not take away, the ability to hope for a better tomorrow. With Pandora's jar opened, the world had changed. The poet Hesiod tells us that humanity did not remain the same throughout history. Instead, like a slow sunset, the quality of life descended through 5 distinct ages. First was the Golden Age under the rule of Cronus. These men lived like gods, with hearts free from sorrow and hard work. They did not grow old and painful. They simply fell asleep when their time was done. The earth gave them fruit without farming. It was a paradise lost. Then came the Silver Age, under the early rule of Zeus. These people remained children for 100 years, playing in their mothers' homes. But when they finally grew up, they were foolish and arrogant. They refused to honor the gods, and so Zeus, in his disappointment, hid them away in the earth. Next was the Bronze Age. These men were terrible and strong. They loved the groan of war and the violence of the spear. Their tools were bronze, their houses were bronze, and their hearts were as hard as flint.
They destroyed each other with their own hands, leaving no names behind, descending into the damp house of Hades without glory. Fourth was the Age of Heroes. This was a brief, shining interruption in the decline, a godlike race of men, bolder and more just than those who came before. These were the men who fought at Thebes and Troy. When they died, they were sent to the Isles of the Blessed, at the ends of the earth, to live in peace forever. And finally, we arrived at the Iron Age, the age we live in now, a time of toil and struggle, where parents and children quarrel, where the wicked often triumph over the good, and where rest is hard to find. It is a time of hardship, yet, because of Pandora, it is also a time of hope. It was in the transition to the Age of Heroes that the great stories began, stories of men who were half divine, bridging the gap between the earth and the sky. The story begins in the city of Argos with a king named Acrisius. Like many kings in Greek myths, he was troubled by a prophecy. The oracle of Delphi told him a terrifying truth. He would never have a son, but his daughter, Danae, would bear a child who would one day kill him. Acrisius was fearful, but he could not bring himself to kill his own daughter. Instead, he built a chamber of bronze, buried deep within the earth, or perhaps raised as a high tower, with no doors and only a slit for air and light. He locked Danae inside, thinking he could cheat fate. But walls of bronze mean nothing to the king of the gods. Zeus looked down and saw the princess in her solitude. He transformed himself into a shower of golden rain. He poured through the roof of the bronze chamber, filling her lap with shimmering light. From this divine union, a son was born. His name was Perseus. For a time, Danae kept the baby secret, but the cry of a child cannot be hidden forever. When Acrisius heard the sound, he was furious. He dragged Danae and the infant out of the tower. Still terrified of the god's wrath if he spilled family blood, he chose a cruel alternative. He placed Danae and baby Perseus into a wooden chest. He nailed the lid shut and cast them into the tossing gray waves of the sea. The sea, ruled by Zeus's brother Poseidon, was gentle. The chest did not sink. It drifted for days, bobbing like a cork, until it washed up on the shores of the island of Seriphos. A fisherman named Dictys found the chest tangled in his nets. He opened it and found the mother and child alive. Dictys was a kind man, and he raised Perseus as his own son. Years passed, and Perseus grew into a strong, proud young man. But trouble stirred again. The king of the island, Polydectes, who was the cruel brother of the kind fisherman, wanted Danae for his wife. Danae refused him, and Perseus stood as her protector. Polydectes devised a plan to get rid of the boy. He announced a fake marriage for himself and demanded a wedding gift from every man on the island, a horse. Perseus, being poor, had no horse to give. In a moment of youthful pride, he stood up and declared, "I have no horse, but I will bring you any other gift you ask for, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa." The king smiled. He had trapped the boy. "Very well," Polydectes said. "Bring me the head of Medusa." It was a suicide mission. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, terrible monsters with brass claws and snakes for hair. But Medusa had a unique curse. Anyone who looked directly at her face would be instantly turned to solid stone. Perseus wandered the shore, despairing of his foolish boast. But the gods do not abandon their children. Hermes, the messenger god, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, appeared to him. They gave him the tools he would need. Hermes gave him a sword of adamantine that could slice through dragon scales. Athena gave her own shield, polished like a mirror. Never look at her directly, Athena warned. Look only at her reflection in the bronze. But to find Medusa, Perseus needed directions. He had to travel to the edge of the world to find the Graiae, the Gray Sisters. These were 3 ancient hags who shared one eye and one tooth between them. Perseus hid in the shadows of their cave. As they passed the single eye from one sister to the next, he snatched it. Blind and panicked, they traded the secret location of the nymphs of the north in exchange for their eye. Perseus flew to the nymphs, who gave him the final items for his quest: winged sandals to fly, a magic bag that could hold anything, and the helm of Hades, which made the wearer invisible. Now fully equipped, Perseus flew across the ocean to the land of the Hyperboreans, a place of eternal twilight. There he found the lair of the Gorgons. It was a silent place. Scattered around the entrance were statues, men and beasts frozen in poses of terror. These were not carvings, they were the victims of Medusa. Perseus put on the helm of darkness, vanishing from sight. He hovered in the air on his winged sandals. He drew his sword, but he did not look down. He watched only the reflection in his polished shield. Below him, the Gorgons slept. Their hair of living snakes hissed softly, but the monsters lay still. He identified Medusa, the only mortal among the sisters. Guided by Athena's hand, he swooped down. With one clean stroke, looking only at the mirror, he severed Medusa's head. He did not look at the prize. He thrust the head into the magic bag and pulled the drawstrings tight. From the severed neck of the monster, 2 creatures sprang forth: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior of gold. The other 2 Gorgon sisters awoke, screaming in rage. They flapped their iron wings, searching for the killer. But Perseus, invisible in his helm, sped away into the wind, leaving the cursed island behind. On his way home, Perseus had many adventures, including saving the princess Andromeda from a sea monster in Ethiopia. But the final act of his drama awaited him in Greece. He returned to Seriphos to find his mother hiding in a temple from the cruel king Polydectes. Perseus marched into the king's banquet hall. The king and his courtiers laughed at him. "Where is your gift, boy?" they sneered. "Here," Perseus said. He turned his head away and pulled Medusa's head from the bag. The king and all his men looked. In an instant, the laughter stopped. They were turned to gray, cold stone, frozen forever in their mockery. Perseus gave the island to the kind fisherman Dictys. He returned the magical items to the gods and gave Medusa's head to Athena, who mounted it on her shield as a symbol of protection. But the old prophecy remained. Perseus traveled to Argos to make peace with his grandfather, Acrisius. The old king, hearing Perseus was coming, fled to a neighboring city. Perseus followed, not to harm him, but to enter an athletic competition, the discus throw. As Perseus stepped up to throw, a gust of wind caught the heavy bronze disc. It flew off course, into the crowd. It struck an old man, killing him instantly. The man was Acrisius. The prophecy, spoken so many years ago, had come true. Perseus, stricken with grief, realized that no man, hero or king, can outrun his fate. He buried his grandfather and went on to found the great city of Mycenae, becoming the ancestor of the greatest hero of them all, Hercules.
Generations after Perseus, the blood of Zeus mingled once again with the mortal line of Argos. The result was Hercules, a name that would echo longer than any kingdom. But Hercules began life in the shadow of divine jealousy. He was the son of Alcmene, a mortal queen, and Zeus, who had visited her in disguise. Hera, the queen of Olympus, despised the child before he even drew his first breath.
She saw him not as a baby, but as a living insult. One night, while the infant Heracles slept in his nursery, Hera sent 2 large serpents slithering into his cradle. They moved silently across the floor, their eyes glowing in the dark. But the child did not cry out. With a strength that belonged to no mortal infant, Heracles simply reached out. He grasped one snake in each chubby fist and squeezed. When the nursemaids arrived in the morning, they found the serpents lifeless and the baby cooing softly, playing with them as if they were toys. It was clear to everyone, this was no ordinary boy. Heracles grew into a man of immense stature. He was skilled with the bow, the sword, and the wrestler's grip. He married Princess Megara and lived happily in Thebes, raising a family. But Hera was patient. She waited until his happiness was at its peak. Then she struck his mind. She sent a cloud of madness upon him, a red mist that twisted his vision. In a blind frenzy, unable to distinguish friend from foe, Heracles struck down his own wife and children. When the madness lifted, he woke to find his life in ruins. Crushed by guilt, he exiled himself. He traveled to the oracle of Delphi, desperate for a way to wash the stain from his soul. The oracle gave him a harsh sentence. He had to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns, a man far weaker and more cowardly than himself, for 12 years. He had to perform whatever tasks the king demanded. Only then would he be forgiven. Only then would he find peace. King Eurystheus, terrified of Heracles' strength and urged on by Hera, devised tasks he believed were impossible. These were the 12 labors. First, he commanded Heracles to kill the Nemean lion. This was a beast whose golden fur was impervious to all weapons. Swords bent against its skin, arrows shattered on contact. Heracles tracked the beast to its cave. Realizing his weapons were useless, he threw them aside. He wrestled the lion with his bare hands, choking the life from it with a grip that could not be broken. He skinned the beast using its own claws and wore the pelt as armor ever after. Next was the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent lurking in the swamps. It had 9 poisonous heads, and if one was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. Heracles fought it in the muck and mire. He called for his nephew, Iolaus, to bring a torch. As Heracles severed each head, Iolaus cauterized the stump with fire, preventing the new heads from growing. The monster fell, and Heracles dipped his arrows in its venom, making them deadly forever. Then came the Ceryneian hind, a deer with horns of gold, sacred to the goddess Artemis. It was so fast it could outrun an arrow. Heracles did not kill it. He chased it for a full year, displaying patience equal to his strength, until he caught it gently and carried it back to the king. The labors continued, taking Heracles to the snowy peaks and the filthy stables. He captured the Erymanthian boar in deep snow. He cleansed the Augean stables, which housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in 30 years. He did not use a shovel. Instead, he used his mind. He dug a canal and diverted 2 rushing rivers to flow through the stables, washing the filth away in a single day. He drove away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with beaks of bronze. He captured the Cretan bull, the father of the Minotaur. He tamed the mares of Diomedes, wild horses that ate human flesh. Then he was sent to the edge of the world to steal the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. What began as a peaceful exchange ended in tragedy and battle due to Hera's interference, but Heracles returned with the prize. Then came the cattle of Geryon, a monster with 3 bodies. To reach him, Heracles split a mountain in 2, creating the Pillars of Hercules at the Straits of Gibraltar. The final labors were the hardest, for they took him out of the mortal world entirely. Eurystheus demanded the golden apples of the Hesperides. These grew in a secret garden at the sunset edge of the earth. Hercules traveled until he found Atlas, the Titan condemned to hold up the sky for eternity. Hercules offered a trade. He would hold the sky if Atlas would fetch the apples. The Titan agreed, glad to be rid of his burden. Hercules stood there, the weight of the heavens crushing his shoulders, every star, every cloud, the infinite heavy blue. When Atlas returned with the apples, he did not want the sky back, but Hercules tricked him. "Just hold it for a moment," Hercules said, "while I adjust my cloak." Atlas took the weight back, and Hercules picked up the apples and walked away. The 12th and final labor was the ultimate test. Hercules had to go to the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of hell. He descended through a cave mouth, walking past the shades of the dead who fled from his vitality. He stood before Hades himself. The dark god looked at the hero and made a deal. "You may take the dog, but only if you can master him without weapons." Hercules found the beast at the gates. He wrapped his massive arms around the three snarling necks. The dog bit and thrashed, but the hero's grip was iron. He dragged the subdued beast all the way up to the palace of Eurystheus. The king was so terrified he hid in a large jar until Hercules agreed to take the monster back. Hercules had earned his freedom, but a hero's life is never quiet. Years later, he fell victim not to a monster, but to a mistake. His wife, Deianira, tricked by a dying centaur, gave Hercules a tunic soaked in the Hydra's poison, thinking it was a love charm. The poison burned his flesh like fire. Realizing he was dying, Hercules climbed Mount Oeta. He built his own funeral pyre from oak branches and laid down upon it, ready to end his suffering. But as the flames rose, a miracle happened. His mortal half burned away, but his divine half, the part given by Zeus, remained. A cloud descended, and thunder shook the peaks. Hercules was lifted up to Mount Olympus. There he was reconciled with Hera. He was given Hebe, the goddess of youth, as his bride. The man who had suffered more than any other was granted the ultimate rest. He became a god, a constellation in the night sky, a symbol that endurance, no matter how painful, leads to immortality. While Hercules was wrestling lions in the Peloponnese, a different kind of hero was born in the small town of Troezen. His name was Theseus. His birth was shrouded in mystery. His mother was the princess Ethra, but his father's identity was dual. On the same night, she was visited by King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, the god of the sea. Theseus would grow up with the claim of a king and the blood of a god. Before King Aegeus left for Athens, he buried his sandals and a sword beneath a massive, heavy rock. "When the boy is strong enough to lift this stone," he told Ethra, "send him to me." Theseus grew up unaware of his destiny, but when he reached manhood, his mother led him to the rock. It was a boulder that no ordinary man could shift. Theseus did not use brute force alone. He used leverage and determination. He heaved the stone aside, revealing the rusted sword and the leather sandals. He strapped them on. It was time to claim his birthright. To get to Athens, Theseus had two choices: the safe route by sea or the dangerous coastal road infested with bandits and monsters. Wanting to prove himself, Theseus chose the road. This journey was not a war, but a cleansing. He encountered Sinis, the pine bender, who trapped travelers in trees. He met Sciron, who kicked wanderers off cliffs, and he faced Procrustes, the cruel innkeeper who forced guests to fit his iron bed by stretching them or cutting them to size. Theseus defeated them all, not with wild rage, but with poetic justice. He turned their own traps against them. By the time he reached Athens, he was not just a traveler, he was a bringer of law and order. He was recognized by his father, King Aegeus, just in time to save himself from a poisoning plot by the sorceress Medea. The king embraced his son, but the joy was short-lived. Athens was in a city in mourning.
Years prior, Athens had lost a war against King Minos of Crete, the powerful ruler of the islands. The price of peace was terrible. Every 9 years, Athens had to send a tribute, 7 young men and 7 young women. They were not sent to become servants, they were sent to the labyrinth. Deep beneath the palace of Knossos on Crete, Minos had commissioned the master inventor Daedalus to build a maze. It was a structure of infinite complexity, a tangle of corridors that turned back on themselves. In the center of this darkness lived the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, born of a curse and fed on human flesh. When the black-sailed ship arrived to collect the tribute, Theseus volunteered. He would not go as a victim, but as a slayer. He promised his father, Aegeus, that if he survived, he would change the ship's black sails to white on the return journey. The ship arrived in Crete. The tributes were paraded before King Minos. But amidst the fear, eyes met. Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, saw Theseus and fell in love with his bravery. She knew that even if he killed the beast, he would never find his way out of the maze. The labyrinth was designed to trap the mind as well as the body. So she went to Daedalus, the builder, and asked for the secret. That night she met Theseus at the entrance to the dungeon. She gave him a simple tool, a ball of red thread. "Tie it to the door," she whispered. "Unravel it as you go. It will be your guide back to the light." Theseus entered the darkness. The air was cold and smelled of old stone and dust. He walked for hours, turning left, turning right, the red thread trailing behind him like a lifeline. Finally, in the dead center of the maze, he heard the heavy breathing of the bull man. The fight was brutal and silent in the dark. Theseus did not have his weapons, but he had the element of surprise. He overpowered the Minotaur, ending the curse of Crete forever. Following the thread, he led the terrified Athenians back to the surface, where the moonlight waited. Theseus fled Crete with Ariadne and the survivors. But myths are rarely simple love stories. On the island of Naxos, they stopped to rest. While Ariadne slept, the god Dionysus appeared to Theseus in a dream and commanded him to leave her, for she was destined to be the god's bride. With a heavy heart, Theseus sailed away, leaving Ariadne behind. In his grief, or perhaps simply distracted by the weight of his journey, he forgot his promise to his father. He left the black sails hoisted on the mast. King Aegeus stood on the high cliffs of Athens, scanning the horizon. When he saw the black sails, his heart broke. Believing his son was dead, he threw himself into the sea below. To this day, that water is known as the Aegean Sea. Theseus became king, a wise ruler who united the people, but he ruled with the memory of the father he had failed. While Theseus ruled in Athens, another great saga was beginning in the north, in the city of Iolcus. A young prince named Jason was challenged to perform an impossible task to reclaim his throne. He had to retrieve the golden fleece. The fleece was the skin of a magical flying ram hung in a sacred grove in the distant land of Colchis, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason knew he could not do this alone. He sent out a call to all the heroes of Greece, and they answered. This was the generation before the Trojan War, the greatest gathering of talent the world had ever seen. Hercules came, taking a break from his labors. Orpheus, the musician, whose song could charm stones, joined them.
Castor and Pollux, the twin sons of Zeus, Peleus, who would become the father of Achilles. They built a ship named the Argo, the swift vessel. They became the Argonauts. Their journey was the Odyssey of its time. They sailed through the clashing rocks, massive cliffs that smashed together to crush ships. They navigated past the Sirens, where Orpheus played his lyre so loudly and beautifully that it drowned out the monster's deadly song. When they reached Colchis, the king of that land was not willing to give up the fleece. He set Jason tasks to yoke fire-breathing bulls and to sow a field with dragon's teeth. When Jason planted the teeth, armed skeleton warriors sprang from the earth. But the king's daughter, Medea, a powerful sorceress, had fallen for Jason, much like Ariadne had for Theseus. She gave him a potion to make him invincible for a day, and taught him to throw a rock among the skeletons, causing them to fight each other until none were left. With Medea's magic, Jason put the dragon to sleep and seized the golden fleece. The Argo sailed home, its crew triumphant. They were the greatest team of heroes in history, shining bright before the dark clouds of the Trojan War began to gather.
The age of heroes was reaching its peak, but the seeds of its destruction were sown at a wedding feast. Zeus had intended to marry the sea nymph Thetis, a creature of shimmering beauty, but a prophecy warned him the son of Thetis would be greater than his father. Zeus, ever fearful of being overthrown like Cronus and Uranus before him, hastily arranged for Thetis to marry a mortal king named Peleus. The wedding was the social event of the century. It was held on the high slopes of Mount Pelion. The Muses sang, the Nereids danced on the waves, and all the gods of Olympus descended to celebrate. All, that is, except one. Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, was not invited. It was a sensible exclusion. No one wants conflict at a wedding. But Eris was not one to be ignored. She arrived unseen at the edge of the feast. She did not scream or fight. Instead, she tossed a single object onto the banquet table. It was a golden apple, plucked from the garden of the Hesperides. Inscribed upon its skin were 3 words, Te Calliste, to the fairest. The apple rolled across the table and stopped. Immediately, 3 hands reached for it. Hera, the queen of gods, claimed it by right of power. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, claimed it by right of dignity. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, claimed it by right of nature. The argument threatened to tear Olympus apart. Zeus, wise enough not to judge a beauty contest between his wife and his daughters, passed the burden to a mortal. He sent Hermes to guide the 3 goddesses to Mount Ida, near the city of Troy. There, a young shepherd named Paris was tending his flocks. Paris was actually a prince of Troy, exiled because of a prophecy that he would burn the city, but he lived simply in the hills. The 3 goddesses appeared before him in all their terrifying glory. They did not just ask for his judgment, they offered bribes. Hera offered him power. Choose me, and you shall be high king over all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered him victory. Choose me, and you shall never lose a battle. You will be the wisest of men. Aphrodite smiled and adjusted her robes. She offered him love. Choose me, and you shall have the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris was young, and his heart ruled his head. He handed the apple to Aphrodite. In that moment, he gained the favor of one goddess, but he earned the eternal hatred of 2 others. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen. She was the daughter of Zeus and Leda, and she was already married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta.
Years earlier, when Helen was of marrying age, every prince in Greece had sought her hand. Her earthly father, King Tyndareus, feared that choosing one would cause the others to declare war. It was the clever Odysseus who solved the problem. He proposed the oath of Tyndareus. All the suitors must swear to defend whoever became Helen's husband. They swore the oath, and Menelaus was chosen. Now, guided by Aphrodite, Paris traveled to Sparta, across the Aegean Sea. Menelaus welcomed him as a guest, but while Menelaus was away at a funeral, Helen and Paris fled. Whether she went by force or the madness of love, the result was the same. They sailed for Troy, taking the queen and the Spartan treasury with them. When Menelaus returned to an empty palace, his rage was boundless. He did not just call for his army, he called for his brother, Agamemnon, the high king of Mycenae. And Agamemnon sent messengers to every corner of Greece. The oath of Tyndareus was invoked. The heroes had to assemble. Not everyone wanted to go. They knew this war would be long and bloody. Odysseus, now the king of Ithaca, had a newborn son, Telemachus. When the messengers arrived, Odysseus feigned madness. He hooked a donkey and an ox to his plow and began sowing his fields with salt instead of seed. But the messenger Palamedes suspected a trick. He placed the baby Telemachus in front of the plow. Instantly, Odysseus swerved to avoid the child, proving his sanity. His ruse exposed, he joined the fleet. Then there was Achilles. He was the son of Peleus and Thetis, the child born of that fateful wedding. His mother knew his destiny. He could live a long, quiet life, or a short, glorious one at Troy. She chose life. She hid him on the island of Skyros, disguised as a girl among the daughters of the king. But the Greeks knew they could not take Troy without him. Odysseus, the trickster, arrived on the island posing as a merchant. He laid out jewelry and fine dresses, but hidden underneath was a sword and shield. A trumpet blast sounded a false alarm. The girls fled, but Achilles grabbed the weapon. His cover blown, he accepted his fate. He would go to Troy, and he would never return. The fleet gathered at Aulis. Over 1,000 ships, a forest of masts waiting to sail. But the winds would not blow. Day after day, the sea remained flat as glass. The prophet Calchas revealed the terrible truth. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, was angry. Agamemnon had offended her. The only way to bring the wind was a sacrifice. Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon struggled with the choice, his family or his glory. In the end, ambition won. He tricked his wife Clytemnestra into sending the girl to camp, claiming she was to marry Achilles. When Iphigenia arrived, there was no wedding, there was only an altar. As the blade fell, some say the girl accepted her fate with bravery. Others say Artemis took pity at the last second, replacing her with a deer and spiriting her away. But to the watching army, the blood was spilled. The winds immediately began to howl. The ships launched.
The Greeks crossed the Aegean and landed on the beaches of Troy. An oracle had said that the first Greek to step on Trojan soil would die. Protesilaus, a brave prince, saw the hesitation of his comrades. He leaped from his ship, eager for glory, and was immediately struck down by a Trojan spear, likely thrown by Hector, the prince of Troy. The war had begun. The Greeks pulled their ships onto the sand and built a massive camp. They laid siege to the great walls of Troy, walls built by Poseidon himself. They thought the city would fall in weeks. They were wrong. The war would last for 10 agonizing years. It would grind the golden generation of heroes into dust, testing the limits of human endurance
and divine interference.